Welcome to this explainer. We're diving straight into a story that starts like a classic slice of 1950s Americana, a picture-perfect community. But just inches below those manicured lawns and brand-new playgrounds, a completely invisible, highly dangerous reality was lurking. Today, we're unpacking the shocking true story of the Love Canal disaster.
It's honestly a terrifying question to think about, right? What actually happens when the perfect neighborhood you just bought into is built on a toxic secret? I mean, imagine pouring your entire life savings into your absolute dream home, only to find out the land itself is actively poisoned. That's what we're looking at today, how a booming 1950s suburban dream in Niagara Falls, New York, quietly and tragically transformed into one of America's most infamous environmental crises.
Part 1. The Perfect Neighborhood.
So on the surface, this place was everything a post-war family could possibly want. We're talking affordable new homes, modern schools, sunny playgrounds where kids could safely ride their bikes. Optimistic families were moving in by the hundreds. They really believed they had found a pristine, safe haven to raise their kids and live out the American dream. But what they couldn't see and what developers conveniently left out of the sales pitch was the hidden reality right beneath their feet. That pristine neighborhood was sitting squarely on top of a massive, abandoned canal that had been used for years as an industrial chemical dumping ground.
Section 2. A Toxic Secret Below.
The sheer scale of what was hidden down there is, well, it's truly staggering. 20,000 tons. Let that number sink in for a second. Long before this land was ever subdivided and sold off for residential development, an astonishing 20,000 tons of hazardous industrial chemical waste had been buried underground. And we're not just talking about a couple of straight barrels here. This toxic waste was packed into thousands upon thousands of steel drums. Instead of disposing of it properly, it was just covered up with a thin layer of dirt and pretty much forgotten by the very corporations that put it there. They literally paved over a chemical wasteland and called it real estate.
But you know what's crazy? For several years, the illusion actually held up perfectly. Everything appeared completely normal. And honestly, that is probably the most terrifying part of the whole Love Canal story, the sheer blissful ignorance of it all. You've got to remember, practically nobody moving in knew what actually lay beneath the soil. The developers certainly weren't advertising it, so for years, residents just lived their daily lives. They mowed their lawns, planted vegetable gardens, and watched their kids play in the grass, completely unaware of the chemical time bomb ticking just inches beneath their boots.
Part 3. The Symptoms Surface.
Then, the illusion started to aggressively unravel, and it definitely didn't happen quietly. Strange anomalies started happening, rapidly, and without any logical explanation. After heavy rainstorms, this thick, black, foul-smelling chemical sludge would literally seep up through the ground, pooling ominously in people's backyards. Kids playing outside in the dirt would come home crying, covered in mysterious chemical burns and blistering skin rashes. Noxious, suffocating odors started filling up basements. Suddenly, entire families were dealing with chronic headaches, relentless dizziness, and all sorts of unexplained, debilitating illnesses. Even beloved family pets were falling sick, and centuries-old trees were just withering and dying off. An absolute nightmare was creeping right into their everyday lives, and at first, nobody knew how to stop it.
But the residents, they refused to just stay quiet and accept their fate. As these alarming symptoms piled up, terrified families banded together. They demanded to know why their kids were getting sick and why their backyards were turning into toxic swamps. Their relentless pressure finally forced local officials to step in and investigate what was really going on. Scientists in full hazmat suits were deployed to the neighborhood, meticulously drilling into the ground to collect and test soil and water samples from all around the properties. The whole community basically held its breath, waiting for answers.
And the test results revealed a horrific reality that was so much worse than anyone had imagined. Those thousands of buried steel drums had completely corroded and breached over the decades. Hundreds of highly toxic chemicals hadn't stayed put. They had escaped, percolating upward and spreading maliciously through the entire neighborhood. This creeping contamination wasn't just ruining lawns, it directly threatened the structural safety of the homes, the foundation of the local elementary school, and most terrifyingly of all, the municipal drinking water supply. The very environment they relied on was absolutely saturated with poison.
Section 4. Evacuation and Outrage.
Obviously, the scientific proof of this contamination ignited furious, entirely justified local outrage. Residents immediately mobilized. They demanded accountability for being placed in such extreme, life-threatening danger without their consent. Families were furious, desperate to protect their kids, and they made enough noise that the rest of the country finally had to listen. This localized panic rapidly snowballed into a full-blown national crisis. It drew news crews and investigative journalists from all across America, who rushed to the town to document this unprecedented, modern environmental disaster unfolding in real time right on national television.
With the intense media spotlight glaring and the irrefutable scientific evidence laid bare, the situation just couldn't be ignored or swept under the rug anymore by any level of government. The crisis grew so dire and the public outcry so deafening that the federal government was forced to step in directly. In a historic, truly unprecedented move for a chemical disaster of this kind, the President of the United States officially declared a massive public health emergency at Love Canal. The immediate aftermath was utterly devastating for the community. Hundreds of families were abruptly evacuated, forced to pack their lives into suitcases and leave behind everything they had built. I mean, can you imagine walking away from your home knowing you can never, ever return? Entire blocks of this once vibrant neighborhood were completely abandoned, turning into boarded-up, toxic ghost towns practically overnight. Ultimately, many of those once perfect houses had to be totally demolished, effectively wiped off the map, because the land itself was deemed way too dangerous for human beings to ever inhabit safely again.
Our final section, the Superfund legacy.
The tragic destruction of Love Canal didn't just end as a localized disaster. It actually became a monumental, permanent turning point in American environmental policy. In 1980, the sheer shock and horror of this exact disaster directly sparked the creation of the Superfund program. This was a massive, landmark federal initiative that finally granted the United States government the sweeping authority and, crucially, the financial funding to identify, actively clean up, and continuously monitor hazardous waste sites across the entire country. It was a direct, systemic answer to the cries of the Love Canal residents.
The creation of Superfund fundamentally changed the rules of the game for American industry. It ensured far stricter, legally binding regulations on exactly how chemical waste is disposed of, making sure it could never again just be buried and ignored by developers. But more importantly, it established vital legal and environmental protections for vulnerable communities located near dangerous industrial zones. It completely overhauled how America handles its toxic byproducts, prioritizing human health over industrial convenience.
When you step back and look at the full timeline of this tragedy, the trajectory is genuinely staggering. We start in the 1950s, with a perfectly normal, hopeful neighborhood built on a foundational lie. We move to the late 1970s, watching that lie inevitably seep to the surface, causing devastating illnesses and forcing a chaotic mass evacuation. And finally, out of all that tragedy and loss, vital national action emerges in 1980 with the birth of the Superfund program, ensuring a mechanism was finally in place to prevent this from ever happening again.
Today, Love Canal remains one of the most sobering environmental disasters in American history. It serves as a powerful, enduring reminder. Decisions made decades earlier can and absolutely will affect generations to come. Protecting public health and the environment has to always remain a priority. It leaves us with a critical question to ponder as we navigate our heavily industrialized modern world. Are we doing enough today to ensure the industrial decisions we make right now don't quietly poison the generations of tomorrow? Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.